Canine dog rescues groom from dark wedding scheme. Bride's hidden past shocked the whole town. The blizzard did not fall. It hunted, snow-knifed sideways across the Montana prairie, swallowing the last line of dusk as Eliza Thornton bent into it, her infant, Samuel, bound to her chest beneath a stiff, frozen shawl. His breath fluttered against her collarbone, then faltered, one thin, failing moth. She counted heartbeats to keep panic from breaking her stride. The wind shrieked through cottonwoods like a warning, and the world narrowed to white and ache, and the drum of her boots dragging free from drifts that tried to claim them. Somewhere behind her, a wolf gave a single clipped bark, too close, too curious. She didn't turn. She couldn't. She whispered names into Samuel's knit cap. His, hers, the mother she'd lost. The God she wasn't sure still listened, until a pinprick of lantern light winked through the storm, then vanished, then returned, as if someone were signaling, as if someone already knew she was coming. Hope struck hot, and with it, dread. Why would anyone beckon a stranger in a night like this? She angled toward the glow, legs trembling, skirt hardened with ice, and crested a low rise where the wind knuckled her sideways. Below, a squat cabin crouched behind a split rail fence, half buried in white. Fresh axe cuts scarred a stump by the door, and a length of rope swung empty, like a noose above a bucket. Eliza mounted the step, the iron ring seared through her damp glove. She knocked. The sound died instantly, swallowed by the howl. Seconds stretched. Behind the door, a floorboard creaked. Another lantern flared in the window to her right, then dropped out of sight, as if someone had stepped away fast. The latch lifted. The door opened onto a tall figure rimmed in lamplight, hat brim, shadowing his eyes. He looked at the baby first, then her. His voice came quiet, certain, and wrong in the wild night. "You're home." What he meant by home and why he'd been waiting will upend everything you expect next. Rain-soaked Willow Hall until the chimneys breathed mist and the gardens blurred into watercolor. Oak limbs hung low with Spanish moss, gravel paths shimmered like thin streams in a fountain-stitched rain, with its own silver thread. Lanterns under the eaves threw buttery halos that trembled in the damp, while the river lent a metallic scent that made the air taste like keys. Nathan Caldwell stood at the altar with hands folded, cuffs darkening where drizzle found fabric. An architect known for spare grace and precise surprises, he trusted numbers more than omens. Yet today the math fled. He smiled for greetings, checked sightlines, and still his pulse ran uneven. Nerves, he told himself, are a tax paid by every groom. Certainty wobbled like reflections in the fountain. Lucas, his younger brother, steadied Titan near the front row. The German shepherd's coat shone black and tan, rain beating along guard hairs, ears high as pennants. Titan had swept the kitchen, florist buckets, closets, and gift tables with cool professionalism. Around vendors and family, he stayed loose. Around Sophia, he changed. Evelyn, Nathan's mother, sat where she could read everything at once. Aisle, altar, exits, the river's slow path. Retirement had not softened the judge, who had weighed more faces than any mirror. She favored silence, collected detail, and distrusted spectacle. Her umbrella leaned against her knee, closed on principle. Rain never kept her from seeing clearly. When ushers seated late arrivals, she watched Titan's posture, the way counsel watches a jury foreperson. Sofia Delgado emerged beside her father at the far end of the aisle, veil bright beneath a pewter sky. Gardenias and lilies formed a cool bouquet wired with silver that tossed light back at the clouds. Beadwork tracked water into tiny constellations. She walked with a dancer's economy, chin angled just so, smile set at a temperature no camera could misread. Nathan felt the familiar lift in his chest, the one he associated with her focused attention, and the way she could convert noise into order. Flashbacks rose like heat from flagstones. The charity gala where they first spoke, thunder stamping along the horizon, while she teased sketches on napkin. A Tybee Island morning, when a pelican shadow brushed the tide, and she told a travel story that skipped childhood entirely. A winter dinner in a brick bistro, where she laughed at an unfinished joke, then turned the talk toward plans, always forward. He loved that momentum, that clean edge. Titan tightened a notch. He lifted his head, drew in air, then fixed on Sophia as if a line had been strung between them. Lucas slid a palm along the withers, and breathed the word that meant attention without alarm. Titan didn't look away. His gaze went from her face to her right hand and back, then down to the hem, where sequins chimed against lace like a quiet metronome. The rumble he gave was intimate, addressed to bones. Guests noticed. Murmurs lifted, rose, fell. An aunt adjusted a shawl, and pretended she hadn't. The officiant checked notes, then watched, then smiled. Nathan's throat went dry. He wanted to scratch Titan behind the ear, and laugh the tension into mist. Instead, he searched Sophia's expression, calm, flawless, opaque. Evelyn leaned toward Lucas without taking her eyes off the bride. "Fee," she whispered. "At 7, he answered. "He's reading something." Evelyn nodded once. A small verdict. The ceremony lurched into motion like a carriage under rain. A jerk, a stubborn roll, momentum eked from tradition. Heels tapped and slipped on wet stone. A child asked a question too loudly, and earned a finger to the lips paired with a smile that didn't reach the eyes. Nathan breathed with the quartet, and cataloged geometry, pergola joinery, chair spacing, the path's turn around the fountain. Sophia passed Titan's row, and the dog rose, not lunging, simply claiming height. The sound in his chest tapered into a blade-thin note and vanished. He watched her hand again. The observation lodged like a brass tap. Nathan remembered their second month when she dodged a weekend with his oldest friends, then arrived late with gifts perfectly chosen, remembering jokes she had never heard. Attention flattered, refusal lingered. The officiant began the welcome. Words floated outward and fell like acts. Nathan repeated lines on muscle memory, aware of the crowd in an aquarium way. Titan settled, but kept his neck extended, eyes glass bright, pointed at the woman gliding up the aisle. Rain pelted the lawn, heavy enough to break into spray where it struck stone. The pergola's gauze gathered beads that clung like patience. Evelyn's gaze cut from Sophia to Titan to Nathan and back, drawing a triangle no one else could see. She would not speak here. Timing mattered. Give a thing enough rope, and it shows its shape. Nathan had inherited some of that discipline, though love had taught him to soften conclusions. He flexed his fingers, wondering whether palms could pray without words. More memory returned, sharp, a roadblock that rerouted them around a neighborhood of murals and barber shops, and Sophia's smile thinned until the highway swallowed the detour. A morning he arrived with pastries and found her condo staged into impeccable order, surfaces bare, no lingering hobby or clutter. Minimalists live longer, he joked. She kissed him and changed the subject. The rings waited in Lucas's pocket. Titan cut his gaze to that pocket, then back to the bride, then to Nathan, measuring distance. Lucas's grip tightened, then eased, a rhythm synced to the quartet. The tail lay low, a dark brush on wet stone. A cousin read about patience as shelter. Nathan wanted to believe a house of vows could outlast faults in the site plan. He watched Sophia's profile, perfect from every angle, light sliding across it like water over glass. He realized he had never seen her cry and did not know which song could make it happen. Cameras glinted, rain rattled leaves, the air smelled of cut stems, wet wool, and river metal. Somewhere a gate clicked. Titan's ears marked it, then dismissed it. Whatever pulled at him lived within 10 strides of the altar. Vows approached, sweat cooled under Nathan's collar. Walls he drafted, bore honest loads. Love asks for trust. Trust asks for knowledge. He had one in excess, and the other in deficit. He steadied his breathing, and told himself the day would settle when the words were spoken. Her father kissed her cheek, and withdrew. She lifted her face fully. The bouquet shook a fraction. Maybe rain, maybe something else. Nathan took her hands, cool. Behind them, Titan exhaled, a soft sough over the grain of silence. Lucas whispered a command, meaning stay. The dog obeyed like a taut cable obeys physics. The officiant asked for rings. Lucas placed a box in Nathan's palm. Gold gleamed. The quartet held a note too long. Sophia's shoulders rolled back by 1 degree and held. Titan's head tipped as if a frequency ran along the gauze. Nathan slid the band forward a little, then paused for a breath he hadn't planned. Guests murmured, then hushed. Doubt entered without drama, quiet as a draft, and found a chair. He thought of Evelyn watching for seams, of Titan reading air, of Sophia's careful stories with straight edges, every answer landing upright. Questions pressed like weather. The ceremony moved, because ceremonies always move. Yet beneath every word, the dog's earlier sound kept vibrating, a thread he could not unhear. He lifted his eyes and met the bride's again, searching for a truth he could build on without watching the roofline crack. The reception opened like a wound that would not close, music holding together with trembling bows, while rain tapped the tall windows of Willow Hall. Servers moved like courteous ghosts, setting flutes and small plates. Nobody finished, and talk gathered at the margins instead of filling the room. Nathan wore a host's smile that felt 2 sizes too tight. Titan was no longer at his side. Lucas had led the German shepherd to a guest room after the ceremony, and limped forward. The choice sounded sensible, yet it left a hollow space under Nathan's ribs. Sophia floated from group to group, every greeting balanced, every joke trimmed, a calm so polished it reflected questions back at the asker. She looked luminous, yet something in the precision of her poise made admiration taste like metal. Evelyn, retired judge and watchful mother, stood by a credenza strewn with family photos, and read the room as if reading sworn statements. She drank water, catalogued exits, and tracked the orbit of the bride without chase. After a toast and a round of applause, Sophia touched Nathan's shoulder and excused herself with a practical murmur about hair and lace. Nathan nodded, though Titan's absence pulsed like a quiet alarm. He watched her head toward the east corridor, where the guest room door sat. Inside that room, the dog paced from bed to window to door, and back, breath fogging glass before fading to nothing. As Sophia reached the corridor, Titan barked, one clean strike of sound, not fury, not fear, the sound he used to mark a threat that must be named. Guests flinched without knowing why. Lucas moved, but Evelyn reached the passage first, walking with a purpose that softened nothing. Sophia's stride did not hurry, yet a fractional hesitation pulled through the sling of her gown before silk recovered its line. Titan barked again. Deep. Lucas spoke the settle command. Through the woods. Evelyn paused beneath a landscape, hung slightly higher than the other frames, and noticed the frame sat a degree off plumb. Light from a sconce kissed one raw edge of gilding, the look of something recently touched. Sophia lifted her phone, checked a screen that showed nothing, adjusted her veil, and reassembled composure. Nathan arrived at the corridor, chest tight, hand brushing the panel where Titan's claws rasped from inside. He remembered training fields, scent articles, and the patient logic of a dog that had never signaled without cause. Certainty about Titan felt like stone. Uncertainty about everything else felt like fog. Evelyn lifted the painting, slid it aside, and revealed a shallow recess cut into plaster, a plastic sleeve rolled inside with a narrow brass key taped to the back. She drew the page an inch and saw columns of names, and account strings, ink too neat for party note. Near the center, a name stitched cold through Nathan's nerves. Valeria Ortiz. He had never heard Sophia speak it, yet the syllables landed with the weight of a door shut at the end of a long hall. Evelyn slipped the paper back far enough to hide again, kept the key in her palm, and let the frame hang crooked as before. Sophia turned toward them with that poised brightness that had charmed patrons and committees all year. She apologized for keeping the caterer waiting, paid a compliment to a cousin's earrings, and smiled at Evelyn with perfect courtesy. Inside the room, Titan gave a growl that thickened the air. Lucas repeated the command, and braced a shoulder against the urge to open the door. Nathan asked whether everything was fine and heard the thinness of the question. Sophia answered in language so tidy it met every social requirement, while touching none of the real ones. Evelyn's gaze did not blink. She asked Sophia if she carried a safety pin. The answer came fast and pleasant. No. Fingers brushed a flat clutch that seemed too thin to hold anything extraneous. Titan's claws slid along wood, a vibration Nathan felt through his palm. He breathed and stepped back, pretending patience he did not own. Evelyn adjusted the crooked frame, then left it crooked, a small decision that recorded itself for later. Fog pressed against the French doors, and trimmed the world to the measure of this corridor. Nathan guided Sophia back toward the lights, yet the bark stayed in his ribs like a wedge. Dances began in polite fragments. Speeches resumed. Jokes fell like paper airplanes. He watched Sophia's hands. Her right hand held his ring with ceremonial care. Her left managed details, never idle, always Evelyn circulated, asking soft questions that arranged fragments into lines. A banker's name, a grant account, a routing pattern. Each answer was a bead, and the paper in her jacket threaded them. Nathan felt a line draw in a hush between songs. Titan barked once more, amplified by distance, and the sound split the chatter like a twig. He lifted a glass because he was expected to lift it and felt the weight of ritual more than the lift of joy. Sophia pressed his forearm with tenderness that would have broken him yesterday. Tonight it skimmed the surface. She slipped away again with a word about thanking the florist. Evelyn followed with the patience of a tie. In the corridor, the judge noticed a fingernail's worth of plaster dust near the frame's lower edge, a sign that fingers had hurried. She smiled without mirth and kept walking. Nathan stopped halfway to the door and listened. Inside, Titan scraped a chair leg, then paced, then let out a contained snarl, the moral equivalent of a red line through a ledger. He set his palm to the wall. The vibration ran up his arm like a wire singing. He closed his eyes and remembered every time instinct had tapped his shoulder in life, and he had chosen a prettier story. Wind combed the eaves. The chandelier trembled. He opened his eyes and saw again the letters on that list. Valeria Ortiz did not belong to their cards or their vows, yet it existed in ink among accounts that looked like doors. He imagined what kind of doorwork required aliases and strings of numbers. Architects draw plans so loads fall honestly. Nothing about this felt on it. Evelyn returned and drifted beside him as if interested only in the view. The key chilled her palm through the jacket. The document brushed her heart like a second rhythm. Sophia says the caterer is thrilled, Nathan said, hearing how strange the sentence sounded. Good, Evelyn answered. Let's give the night enough rope. They walked back beneath chandeliers that threw soft halos over damp shoulders and damp patience. Nathan thanked an uncle for traveling, laughed at a story he could not repeat, and watched Sophia laugh in exactly the same way every time she laughed. He told himself consistency was grace. He told himself that being calm under pressure meant character. Then Titan barked a final time, and the note slid through the ballroom like a line drawn across a map. Nathan realized the difference between noise and signal was not volume, but alignment. The dog he trusted had aligned with danger. The woman he loved had aligned with silence. If you have ever felt a whisper beneath certainty, a nudge that asked you to look again, remember that private alarm now. When instinct speaks, honor it long enough to test the room. That small courage saves futures nobody sees coming. Nathan set his glass down and found Evelyn under the archway. Rain made a veil of the world beyond the doors. The judge tipped her head. The night still behaved like a celebration, but the cover was thinning. The list existed. The key existed. Titan would not relent, and Nathan at last understood that love demanded truth before vows could bear weight. Rain hardened into a dark sheath over Willow Hall, drumming the panes until the chandeliers shivered, and Nathan surrendered to the signal that had shadowed every step since the vows. Titan's growl pulsed from the east corridor, steady, purposeful, the sound the shepherd used when he had found something that required a handler's hands. Lucas stood by the guest room with damp hair and a jaw set against uncertainty, whispering the stay command through wood that quivered under claw taps. The music in the ballroom tried to sound generous, but conversation broke into nervous islands, and rain stitched every silence with needles. Nathan pressed his palm to the door and felt a vibration climbing into the nerves along his wrist. Years of training had taught Titan a disciplined vocabulary. This note meant located threat, not rumored fear. He looked at Lucas, who nodded once, lifted the latch and stepped. Titan flowed out like a thrown shadow, nose working, tail level, posture firm. The shepherd circled Nathan's legs as if confirming allegiance, then pointed himself at a cedar suitcase propped beneath a window veiled by lace that trembled under the weather. Nathan recognized the suitcase from the suite Sophia used to prepare with the bridesmaids. It looked ordinary, a traveler's prop in a pretty room, yet the dog braced, paws planted, eyes cut bright, chin lowered until whiskers nearly touched the leather. Lucas closed the door to smother the party's noise. Rain hammered the glass. Titan gave one clipped bark, then stared. Nathan squatted, touched the handle, and felt the cold that did not belong to the climate. He worked the latch. Inside lay silk, cosmetics, pins, a mirrored compact kissed with dew from the window, all innocent in their little territories. Titan ignored every glittering thing and leaned toward a stitched seam inside the lid. the place where lining met frame. Nathan slid a fingernail along the seam, and found a wiggle. The lining lifted, unwilling but defeatable. A thin pocket opened like a secret throat. He withdrew a small black wallet with elastic corners, the kind built for cards that do not want to be seen. Within, a passport waited, with clean edges, and an unsmudged photograph. Sophia's face looked out from the lamination, with the same perfect symmetry that had mesmerized donors and cousins, but the printed name arranged itself into other syllables. Valeria Ortiz. Nathan said nothing. Breath shortened. Room narrowed. Rain grew louder, and Titan merely held the floor. Behind the passport a second item slid free, a flash drive glossy as a beetle. Lucas produced a compact laptop from a garment bag, because habit made him carry tools, not just handkerchiefs. They set the device on a vanity beneath a gilt mirror fogged by damp, and Nathan pushed the drive into a port that clicked with tiny finality. Directories unfolded across the screen, venue photos, unflattering surveillance angles, spreadsheets of transfers, encoded memos named for flowers and weather, a pattern too tidy to be random. He opened one folder at random, and saw brides and grooms with faces bright from champagne and hope. Dates stacked in a rhythm that suggested planning windows. A sheet displayed routing numbers leading to islands. Another compiled retainer deposits funneled through corporations that looked reputable if you did not ask them to breathe. Then a list titled Alignments revealed a column of aliases pinned to account trees. His bride's preferred name appeared beside the printed identity in his lap, the two connected by arrows like struts in a cruel drawing. Titan exhaled and pressed against Nathan's knee, a living metronome keeping courage on beat. He turned the passport and tried to disprove what the page insisted on saying. The photograph would not relent. He ran a fingertip over the laminate simply to feel something real. A third pocket inside the wallet yielded a metal key no larger than a thumbnail, stamped with a number he recognized from the page. Evelyn had found behind the crooked frame, every detail linked to another, and each new junction pulled a thread tighter around his chest. He called his mother. Evelyn arrived without ceremony, hair damp from the corridor, eyes steady with the even flame of a person who has seen most forms of theater and refuses to applaud. She read the passport twice, then looked at Nathan, then read again as if the page might choose a more merciful conclusion. Lucas scrolled through file after file, annotating nothing, and remembering everything. Titan stationed himself between the door and the suitcase, the plain posture of a guardian counting beats. Evelyn lifted the key Nathan had placed on the vanity, and compared the stamp to the photograph she had quietly snapped of the hidden list. Numbers aligned, names aligned, weddings in 3 states are aligned. Transfers timed to ceremonies are aligned. Evidence behaved like a net, and the net closed with a whisper. Nathan's chest folded inward as if the chandelier reflected a man smaller than the groom who woke joyful this morning. He remembered Sophia's precise laughter, deft deflections, the missing childhood, the way she treated questions like locks. Love had offered the benefit of the doubt, trust had given rest. Instinct had tapped hinges. He had chosen warmth over inquiry, because joy begged for simplicity. He stared at the drive's directory and clicked on a video file, labeled with an orchid. The clip opened to a view of a coast road, where a couple embraced beside a white fence while a car idled half a block away. Zoomed frames revealed Sophia, or Valeria, discussing a schedule with a man whose face remained outside the crop. Her voice was calm, transactional and empty of romance. The audio caught a phrase about splitting retainers after vows. Nathan stopped the video as if bracing a door. The dog nudged his shin, anchoring the moment to something alive. Evelyn touched his shoulder, not to comfort, but to steady. "We follow the law," she said softly, "and we protect each other while the law works." He nodded, unable to find a word that would not fracture. The passport weighed more than paper. The ring on his hand weighed more than gold. The distance between altar and vanity measured longer than any hallway built on earth. They photographed everything with a quiet method, sealed the wallet in a plastic bag from the minibar, and returned the silk to the suitcase as if restoring an exhibit so it could betray itself later. Lucas wiped Prince with a clean cloth because he thought ahead when the stakes rose. Titan returned to the door and listened, ears pricked for footsteps. From beyond the hallway came muffled applause for a toast that had nothing to do with truth. Rain deepened, turning gutters into living ropes that hissed along stone. Evelyn studied the spreadsheets and saw the tidy arteries thieves prefer. Names linked to initials, initials to boutique firms, firms to shells, shells to water, money resurfacing in accounts that never met seasons. The list behind the frame whispered the same design. Valeria Ortiz sat at the pivot. The judge exhaled one word that meant proceed. Nathan sank into a brocade chair and pressed knuckles to his mouth. He remembered Titan's first true alert, and how belief outran sight. The same fidelity had dragged him to an edge he needed. Perhaps loyalty rarely comforts. Perhaps it rescues. Lucas closed the laptop and pocketed the drive inside a labeled envelope. Evelyn slipped the key into another, then tucked both within her jacket. "We take this to the authorities before dawn," she said. "Because daylight loves document." Nathan nodded again and found breath returning in small, halting increments. He looked at Titan and said, "Good boy," in a voice he barely recognized. The dog sat, offered a calm look, and thumped a tail once against the rug, neither celebratory nor anxious, merely present. Nathan rose and faced the mirror. He saw a man who had built clean lines for clients, and had overlooked crooked ones in his own life because love had painted them with flattering light. Trust can be a skylight that warms everything beneath it, he thought, and also a lens that blinds you to a crack until the first storm. If you have ever felt sunshine where questions should have stood, consider how quickly the weather can change. He closed the suitcase, reset the lining as he had found it, and latched the lid with hands that had learned to keep steady while cutting dovetails. Evelyn stepped to the door, checked the corridor and signaled clear. They exited into the foggy hush, Lucas locking the room behind. On the landing, a portrait watched with oily patience while rain ticked a tattoo on the roof. Nathan slipped the passport bag into his inner pocket for the brief walk to Evelyn's car. They moved together like a small unit, through muted celebration, accepting congratulations with practiced expressions that betrayed nothing. Somebody asked for the couple, and Nathan said Sophia was thanking vendors, which was not a lie, only an incomplete match. He felt each step like a lesson in weight. The band struck a bright chord that failed to lift the air. Titan ranged at his knee, a silent engine, pulling him toward whatever came next. It hurt.
La lluvia golpeaba los ventanales del estudio como si quisiera borrar el día. Y Nathan cerró la puerta con un clic que sonó a sentencia. Titán avanzó pegado a su pierna, pelo erizado, respiración contenida. La lámpara de banco dibujaba un óvalo de cobre sobre la mesa. Fuera, los robles se inclinaban ante ráfagas que traían olor a río. Sofía esperaba junto a la chimenea apagada, todavía perfecta. Sobre el cuero, Nathan dejó un pasaporte y un pendrive. El nombre impreso hablaba sin ayuda. Valeria Ortiz. Ella sostuvo la mirada, palideció apenas, y esbozó una sonrisa mínima. Siéntate, dijo. No hagas esto más difícil. Titán gruñó grave desde el suelo. Necesito la verdad, respondió él. La tienes delante. Tocó el pasaporte con la punta del dedo. Ese es mi nombre. ¿Desde cuándo? Desde siempre. ¿Y Sofía? Un abrigo. Calienta. No define. Dime quién eres además de letras, pidió Neth. Soy parte de un grupo que no firma con tinta, contestó. Dentro lo dirige una figura a la que todos llaman Godede. ¿Me elegiste? Sí. ¿Por qué? Por tu empresa, tus vínculos, tu reputación limpia, tus contratos, y por algo que no esperé. Titán mostró los dientes sin ruido. ¿Qué más? Te quise. Fue un error táctico. Nathan sintió una grieta abrirse en el pecho. ¿Me usaste y luego me amaste? Entré para usar, dijo. Me quedé porque amar cambió el plan. Titán dio un paso, clavando la mirada en su bolsillo. No llevo arma, añadió. Solo miedo. ¿A qué? A Godede, a fallar. A ti. Nathan abrió el pasaporte ante la luz amarilla. Vi otras bodas en esos archivos, transferencias, códigos, rutas. Yo gestionaba accesos, admitió. Diseñaba entradas y salidas. ¿Cuántas veces? Demasiadas para que la disculpa quepa en una frase. El perro emitió un bramido cuando ella se acercó. Quieto, ordenó Nathan, y Titán obedeció sin dejar de observarla. Mírame, dijo Valeria. No soy una inocente, pero tampoco soy solo un expediente. Cuando reí contigo a medianoche, no era teatro. Cuando te defendí en aquella reunión no fue cálculo. Cuando aprendí tu café no fue técnica. Pero sabías que querías del contrato de la biblioteca, replicó. Nombres, calendarios, seguros. Conocía la superficie, dijo. Luego, aprendí el interior. Por eso duele. Nathan apoyó los dedos en una silla y cerró los ojos un instante, buscando fuerza en la memoria de un perro que jamás marcó al vacío. Tengo rabia, dijo, y también recuerdo tus manos cuando el mundo fue demasiado ruidoso. Puedo ayudar, murmuró ella. Puedo entregar rutas, claves, patrones. Puedo llevarte a Godede, por redención o por supervivencia, por ambas. Si lo que sentí vale algo, déjame probarlo. Un relámpago abrió el techo en una malla pálida. Titán gruñó otra vez, como si oliera medias verdades moviéndose por pasillos. Dime todo, exigió Nathan. ¿Qué plan tenías para mí después de la luna de miel? Tu firma sería usada para deslizar fondos a una fundación pantalla, contestó. Después distancia, un final elegante. Yo me iría con otra ciudad cosida al pasaporte. Y sin embargo, estás aquí, porque Titán me delató y porque mi corazón ya no obedecía. Godede no tolera desvíos. Nombres, daré los de arriba, dijo. Los de abajo no. Titán tensó el lomo, emitiendo aviso. Nathan entendió. Media verdad no sirve. Si juegas conmigo, no habrá segundo intento. Lo sé. Evelyn golpeó 2 veces y entró sin esperar permiso, empapada, ojos como faros. Vio el pasaporte, vio el dispositivo, vio al perro. ¿Cuándo llamo? Ahora, respondió Nathan, soltando un ladrillo encendido. Si me entregas, Godede vendrá por todos, dijo Valeria. Ya vino, replicó Evelyn dejando sobre la mesa la lista hallada, y dejó huellas. El viento lanzó agua contra los cristales con furia marina. Protege a mi padre, pidió la mujer sin máscara. Lo sabrá en sala, dijo Evelyn, y sabrá que su hija eligió frenar un daño. Aún no he elegido, susurró. Titán enseñó colmillos breve, seco, como un notario del peligro. Nathan se acercó lo suficiente para ver en sus ojos la tormenta. Elige, daré ubicación de Godede esta noche. Rutas, teléfonos en frío, cuentas maestras, soltó, y testificaré. Harás más, ordenó Evelyn. Llamarás desde aquí en alta voz. Grabaremos. Valeria tragó. Si marco, alguien caerá. Si dudo, todos caeremos. Titán no duda, dijo Nathan, y el perro inclinó la cabeza, como aprobando. Ella miró al animal, y dejó que la fachada cediera. Gotas treparon a sus pestañas. Nadie supo si eran lluvia o lágrimas. No vine de la nada, dijo. A los 15 me perdí. Godede me recogió, me dio techo, me enseñó a parecer otra. Creí que era fuerza. Resultó cadena. Aprendí a abrir puertas, a cerrar cuentas, a desaparecer. Me convertí en noticia que no se publica. Luego apareciste tú, con líneas limpias y una familia que mira de frente. Quise quedarme quieta. Nadie en mi mundo entiende esa palabra. ¿Y yo qué soy en tu historia? Preguntó Nathan. La habitación donde por primera vez dormí sin zapatos. La frase lo atravesó con ternura y rabia. No sé si puedo creer algo tan pulido, dijo. No te pido fe, susurró. Te pido procedimiento. Dame un margen para reparar. Evelyn marcó, activó grabación y puso el móvil en el centro. Habla. Valeria dio un prefijo, un alias, un patrón descifrado. La tormenta respondió con un redoble. Titán dejó de gruñir. Ahora escuchaba, guardián en cálculo. Nathan sintió furia empujar por dentro, pero también un recuerdo obstinado, una carcajada sin testigo, un mensaje absurdo a la madrugada, una caminata en silencio que lo sostuvo días. La mezcla lo dejó temblando. Si la amabas, se dijo, ¿puede ese amor sobrevivir a los datos? Cuando te vi en el altar y Titán me midió, supe que la vida doble había terminado, dijo Valeria. No porque me descubrieran, sino porque ya no quería esconderme. Quizá eso sea amor, admitió Neth, o quizá miedo bien vestido. Evelyn no dio veredicto. La fiscalía decidirá nombres, tiempos, custodias. Nosotros decidimos no mentir. Acepto, dijo ella. Titán se relajó un matiz. No más. La lluvia siguió lacerante. Nathan recogió el pasaporte y el pendrive. Cada objeto pesaba tanto como una vida. Aquí termina el teatro, dijo. Después vendrá el juicio. ¿Y lo que sentimos? ¿Dónde se juzga? Preguntó Valeria. Nathan no respondió. Miró al perro, que no conoce retórica, solo señales, y encontró un faro. Caminaré con la verdad, aunque me deje sin techo, dijo. Valeria inclinó la cabeza, agradecida y herida. El viento cambió de dirección, y las ramas golpearon otra ventana con insistencia. Dentro, la tensión vibraba entre los tres como un cable vivo. Titán adelantó el hocico hasta rozar la mano de Nathan, y esa caricia mínima sostuvo lo que quedaba de su postura. Si alguna vez dudaste de una sonrisa, perfectamente pulida, si tu instinto señaló una nota que nadie más oía, piensa en este cuarto, y pregúntate si el amor puede redimir a quien mintió. A veces el corazón ve caminos, a veces confunde promesas con salidas de emergencia. Elegir la verdad quizá duela, pero salva más que la costumbre. Antes de juzgar, pregúntate si el amor puede reparar una mentira sin convertirla en costumbre, y si tu corazón soportaría construir futuro sobre heridas que aún sangran.
Gray morning light washed the Savannah courthouse, muting brick, iron, and oak, until everything looked suspended between rain and breath. Fans turned above benches rubbed smooth by years of anxious hands, and the windows carried diagonal threads of drizzle that softened the square to a faint, patient hush. Nathan sat behind counsel with Titan curled against his boots, the shepherd's warmth a steady anchor, while names, numbers, and consequences gathered like weather. Evelyn kept 2 rows distance, posture precise, expression calm, attention fixed on the doorway through which deputies would bring a woman who had traded truth for survival. The clerk called the session, paper whispered, a microphone hummed. Then Valeria Ortiz entered in a plain suit, hair drawn back, gaze level, steps measured by practice rather than confidence. She looked once across the room, met Nathan's eyes, and something inside him split along a hinge he had ignored. Anger swung one way, empathy swung another, both held by a pin called memory. Titan raised his head, tested the air, and laid his chin back on leather, deciding that danger here would arrive through sentences instead of sudden motion. The judge asked her to state her name. Valeria said, Valeria Ortiz, not Sophia, not any variation, just the name that had lived beneath years of careful costume. The prosecutor summarized counts, exhibits, banking paths, aliases, and repeated references to an organizer called J. No theatrics followed, only a map was drawn, and every line pointed toward a life built from fear, skill, and debt. When invited to speak about identity and the past, she rested her hands on the table, set her breath into a rhythm that would not break, and began. She said she was abandoned at 15 in a bus station, 2 states west, carrying a backpack with half a sandwich and a clipped yearbook photo. A woman in a clean coat offered help and opened a door labeled opportunity that, in practice, meant conditional shelter, controlled movement, and a new vocabulary for loyalty. Phones were taught, routes memorized, errands scaled from small to significant, favors converted to rules, until the birth name faded and borrowed names multiplied like unmarked keys. She learned how to read runes, manage alarms, look expensive without spending, carry contracts that hid instructions, and open accounts that thrived in daylight because daylight reassured the naive. Her voice held, yet when she said 15, A tremor passed through the vowels, and settled in Nathan like a coin falling inside a deep, dark well. She spoke of debts recast as chains, of a network that called itself family while erasing choice. She named J.D. as the planner, who rarely raised a voice, promised an exit after one last job, and wrote a new last job whenever the calendar turned. She admitted she entered Nathan's life on assignment, compiling public filings, photos and calendar notes to test where a clean reputation could lend cover to moving money no city would notice. She glanced at Evelyn and acknowledged the eye that noticed crooked frames, then looked at Titan and thanked the dog for naming a danger no human wanted to claim. Finally, she looked at Nathan and admitted the part that did not fit the ledger. Love arrived unsummoned, refused to behave like camouflage, and kept asking for boundaries she could not supply while lying. The judge waited without impatience. Rain softened. The room listened as if listening might repair something already cracked. Valeria continued with specifics: transfers she arranged, shells she used, ledgers she tracked, and the likelihood that cooperation would end in prison. She asked for no protection for anyone except a father who believed holidays more than patterns. She did not ask for forgiveness. She asked the record to reflect that by the end affection was not a tactic. Evelyn's shoulders loosened by a fraction, not because the story excused the crime but because plain speech signaled that evasion had finally ended. Nathan folded his hands until his knuckles blanched, and reminded himself to hear as a citizen first. He remembered fields where Titan had learned to indicate threat by stillness, not spectacle, and recognized the same stillness now as testimony. Truth was being named. The prosecutor asked how recruitment worked, how exits were blocked, how someone could live for years without leaving a trace that belonged entirely to her. Valeria explained how fear braided with hope into a rope that led forward while circling the same stake, how passports purchased time, but not freedom, how kindness from marks was catalogued as leverage until contradiction filled the ledger. The judge asked if cooperation would include direct testimony against J.D. She answered yes. A deputy approached to capture particulars for federal intake. Pens scratched. Rain clicked along the sill. No one raised a voice. A mood shifted, the quiet equivalent of a door opening somewhere above the ceiling. Nathan noticed breathing return to normal around him, as if the room had exhaled after holding breath for a year. He remained unsure whether any future could include her, yet he no longer doubted that consequence had been accepted. Titan's ears flexed, then Evelyn glanced at Nathan, and for the first time since the wedding, she looked not only for angles, but also for mercy that would not weaken the case. The judge finished by noting that the statement triggered immediate referral to federal authorities and set procedures for custody and evidence. Counsel stacked files, benches creaked, the gallery thinned. Nathan stayed seated, unwilling to let his body declare a verdict by standing too quickly. Valeria turned as deputies guided her toward a side door. She met Titan's eyes first, and saw no snarl there, only a calm that recognized distance. She nodded at the dog, then at Evelyn, then at Nathan with gratitude that asked for nothing in return. The latch closed. Silence settled. Rain resumed its small hammering, patient and thorough. Evelyn touched Nathan's shoulder and stood beside him without speaking. He thought about drawings layered on tracing paper, each revision visible under the next, and understood that inside any person, names accumulate like that, outlines remaining even when labels change. He also understood that love is not proof of innocence, yet sometimes it is proof that a different life might emerge after sentencing. He rose. Titan rose with him. They stepped into a corridor washed with gray light, and the clean smell of wet wool and old book. Evelyn said the federal team would need the drive, the key, the list, the timeline, and sworn statements from everyone who had handled evidence. Nathan agreed, and promised clean copies by evening. He admitted he did not know what he felt now, only that rage had cooled from flame to steady heat, and beneath that a question had formed. If someone names each wrong and walks into consequence with eyes open, what happens to the part of you that once believed in her laugh? Titan bumped his knee asking for movement. They descended marble stairs to the square, where rain polished cobbles into dark mirrors and a trolley bell chimed like a soft forgiving measure. Umbrellas drifted across the plaza. Strangers passed without realizing a story had tilted by degrees above them, enough to change a future that once pointed toward harm. He let the rain answer brief. Nathan lifted his face into the weather and closed his eyes for one slow count,
then opened them and found Evelyn watching with the patience of someone who knows verdicts about love are never quick. She nodded toward Titan and said, "The dog has been right every time." Nathan looked at the shepherd, at the courthouse doors and answered, "So has the truth." Rain pressed against Willow Hall like an argument the night refused to drop. A cold, relentless pressure that turned hedges into smeared silhouettes, and the oaks into hunched witnesses. Titan slipped through the side door first, with a soldier's glide, nose testing the eddies before paws touched the old pine floor. Nathan followed, locking the deadbolt, listening to gutters roar, as if the roof were trying to speak in torrents. The hallway smelled of wax, wet wool, and river metal, familiar elements rearranged by weather into something adversarial. A draft breathed from the foyer, where a single envelope waited on the table beneath the portrait of the first Caldwell to build here. Condensation clung to the envelope like cold sweat. Inside, block letters cut into paper with the calm of a scalpel. "Stay silent or pay." Nathan felt the message before he finished reading it. A pressure under the sternum that asked for distance and delivered none. Titan bumped his knee and stared at the front windows, ears high, tail low, body entering the stance that meant perimeter first, explanations later. Nathan pocketed the note and moved toward the drawing room, killing lamps until only one pool of light kept the space from passing entirely into the storm. Beyond the glass, fog braided itself across the lawn, softening statues, swallowing the gravel drive, leaving the iron gate a faint line of darker dark. Headlights flared in the distance, then cooled to an idle glow. A patient pair of eyes breathing without blink. The car did not belong to any guest, contractor or neighbor. Titan's throat gave a quiet motor of warning that climbed by degrees until it settled into a constant hum. Nathan drew the curtains almost closed, left a narrow slice to watch and dialed Evelyn. She answered on the second ring, voice clipped, already moving. Federal agents had taken her copies of the drive and the list, then requested an in-person briefing at dawn. While they prepared warrants, she would come here with a second laptop to test a new branch of folders the first pass had missed. "Do not open the door for anyone," she said, "if footsteps do not announce name and purpose. Let Titan speak for the house." When they ended the call, the car at the gate eased forward exactly one length, and stopped again as if measuring the estate's patience. Titan stepped to the window, sniffed the seam, and gave a single precise bark. It landed in Nathan's ribs like a gavel. He turned off the last lamp. The room became a hushed diagram of furniture, stormlight, and a dog that drew every shadow into a map of intent. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked in the guest wing. The old woods complaint stretched by humidity and nerve. Titan pivoted, pointed his nose down the hall, then back to the lawn, undecided where the threat would bloom first. Nathan retrieved the small safe from the study closet and set it on the desk, the combination turning under fingers that shook despite training. He placed the passport bag inside, slid the flash drive's copy beside it, and clicked the locks shut. The act steadied his breath. The doorbell rang once, a soft, almost courtly sound that belonged to holidays, not nights like this. No knock followed, only the bell, and then the car idling, and then the rain. Titan growled long enough to let whoever listened know a line had been drawn. Evelyn arrived 15 minutes later with 2 agents in plain clothes, their badges discreet, their eyes cataloging corners, sightlines, and weather. She carried a folder fat with printouts, and a thermos that smelled like stubborn coffee. The taller agent introduced himself as Ruiz, the other Hart. They read the note, photographed the foyer, and asked Nathan to point out every light switch, camera, and access point. Ruiz studied the distant headlights through binoculars, then told Hart to call the county unit to place a patrol at the road while they worked inside. "Threats sometimes test for reaction before committing," he said. "Silence can be a form of recall." Titan shadowed the scan, checking doors when humans checked doors, returning to Nathan as if to anchor the house to one body. Evelyn opened her laptop at the study table and navigated to folders nested too deep for chance. A directory labeled Seasons hid a ledger of ceremonies cross-referenced with shell entities and courier codes. Another named Weather carried transcripts of short calls in which a calm voice issued last-minute adjustments. JD appeared only as initials in subject lines, and as a recurring sender in a secure messaging export, but the cadence of those notes set the tempo for the entire machine. Funds left clients in tidy parcels, spent a night in boutique charities, and woke inside accounts offshore wearing new biographies. Ruiz listened, impressed by the symmetry and the cruelty, Hart marked the names that matched federal watch lists. Every time Evelyn unlocked a file with a string from the drive, Titan's ears flexed as if he could hear a mechanism slide somewhere beyond hearing. He positioned himself between Nathan and the windows, weight balanced, gaze cutting from man to glass to door in a patient rhythm. A twig snapped in the side garden. The dog answered with a short, flat warning that made both agents pause mid-question. Something moved behind the camellias, then stilled, then scraped once more along brick. Hart drifted to the mudroom, with a hand lifted for quiet, and peered through the small pane above the latch. Nothing obvious, only fog and the suggestion of a darker smear moving left to right. Ruiz asked whether the estate had motion sensors tied to exterior flood. Nathan said yes, and turned the dial. Light roared to life along the side path, washing hedges in white. No figure jumped, no sprint broke the frame. Only rain fell, heavy enough to make its own disguises. Titan did not relax. He stared at the chapter of night that floods could not touch, and rumbled again. Evelyn found a folder called Choir nested under Seasons, and opened a spreadsheet of payments to musicians who rarely performed twice in the same city. The pattern curved through Savannah, Charleston, Nashville, Austin, and 2 island towns famous for weddings. Bank routing strings echoed the list she had pulled from the wall, and at the bottom, a single row glowed like a switch. JD Foundation, a name so bland it dared oversight to yawn. Hart photographed the screen, then asked Nathan to forward a clean copy through the secure portal they carried on an encrypted drive. While files were transferred, the headlights by the gate blinked off. For a moment the night seemed to deepen, as if losing eyes forced every other sense to strain. Titan leaped to the door and barked hard, the kind of sound that makes hearts skip, the kind that says the game has changed and delay is a tax you cannot afford. Nathan checked the peephole. Fog pressed its face to the glass. No silhouette waited on the yet the hairs along his forearms lifted, as if a current had found him. Ruiz stepped beside him, low-voiced. They're probing. Do not give them a pattern. We rotate lights, shift positions, keep calls short, and document everything. Evelyn closed the folder and laid both hands on the table to still the tremor that wanted to start. This is retaliation for her statement, she said, and also a reminder that cooperation does not end a hunt, it relocates it. Hart's phone vibrated. The county unit had located a sedan, registered to a rental agency, plates clean, driver unseen, tires newly replaced. The car had turned north 2 minutes ago, but might circle back if the lane stayed unguarded. Ruiz relayed instructions and returned to the study, where Titan had planted himself like a living barricade. The note in Nathan's pocket seemed to heat against his thigh. He took it out again and read the letters that pretended to be advice while promising injury. Stay silent, or no signature, no time, no flourish. Evelyn slid a plastic sleeve across the desk and said to seal it for Prince anyway. Nathan did, hands careful, breath even. He remembered Valeria's voice in court, admitting each choice without ornament, and anger rose again, clean and bitter, then softened when memory added context he had not wanted. Titan pressed his flank to Nathan's calf, and took weight there, as if bracing the man against tilt. The dog's pulse passed through fabric into skin, a steady metronome learned on training fields and long nights. Something small clicked on the back porch, a latch tasting damp. Titan launched toward the sound, stopped one stride short of the door, and stood like a statue that could turn violent in a breath. Hart reached the porch first, Ruiz a pace behind, both with hands open, light angled low to avoid glare. A ribbon of fog curled under the threshold. A moth knocked itself silly against the pane. No human figure waited. Still, the latch felt warm, and the outer doormat held a new crescent of mud that did not match any other print. Ruiz photographed the mark, and spoke softly into his radio. Units shift. Somewhere beyond the hedges, gravel hissed as tires rolled very slowly, like an exhale that refused to finish. Evelyn returned to the files, digging for lines that would turn threat into charge. A set of messages tucked under a folder named Choir Notes, listed hotel rooms, delivery windows, and a pattern for last-minute asset pickups whenever a bride changed her mind about a vendor. The sender's idiom was polite, dry, nearly clerical. The consistency itself formed a fingerprint. JD did not shout. He scheduled. Nathan read over her shoulder and felt gratitude and fury tangle, until words lost meaning. Titan left the door and resumed his watch between Nathan and the world. The storm pressed closer, rain shouldering panes, wind combing moss into gray rope. He would not lie to himself about risk. Someone wanted him quiet. He touched the dog's collar and felt the metal tag, simple proof that loyalty can be engineered through years of practice and hours of trust. Ruiz called the evening what it was, a message night. They will circle, they will measure light, count steps and map habits. Our job is to give them nothing steady, sleep in shifts, keep a line open to my team, and do not walk the grounds alone until we clear the perimeter at first light. Nathan nodded. He had designed buildings to move people safely, from fear to function. Now he would treat his own home like a site under active hazard. Fog thickened until even the nearest hedge lost its edges. The car did not return, or returned invisibly. The night kept its secret. Titan refused the cushion by the hearth, and chose the threshold, head on pause, eyes bright, ears pivoting to every tick of settling wood. Each time the house sighed, he answered with that quiet motor of resolve. When the clock in the hall struck midnight, the sound felt like a small spine running through the hours. Evelyn closed the laptop and said they had enough to justify broader warrants. JD would feel pressure soon. Pressure does not make predators gentle. Nathan tucked the sealed note into a box marked evidence, and slid it beside the safe. He sat on the rug near Titan, close enough to share breath, far enough to give the animal room to act. He watched the dog hold the line the way a lighthouse holds its beam. Not by volume, but by constance. If you have ever ignored a whisper that told you to reconsider a smile, remember this room and the way instinct guards when language fails. Outside, rain worked the garden down to its bones. Inside, a shepherd worked the night down to its truth. One low growl at a time, Titan listened.
Rain hammered Willow Hall, while federal cars idled along the lane, blue strobes muffled by fog and dripping oak limbs. Inside, agents spread maps across the dining table, evidence bags along the sideboard, and laptops that hummed like small generators. Nathan handed Ruiz the original flash drive. Gloved fingers seeded it into a field vault that began copying with clinical patience. Evelyn stood opposite, steady and relentless, describing seasons, choir, and the faceless shell stamped JD Foundation, her fingertips marking links like stitches, heart-sketched arrows between vendors, couriers, charities, then offshore accounts, a loop perfected through ceremony, applause and vanishing balances. Titan paced triangles between Nathan, the windows, and the corridor, ears twitching, chest tight, eyes bright as lamps behind glass. A tech confirmed overlaps with finance watch lists, flagged new branches, and repeated the same conclusion everyone dreaded, yet expected. JD was not local. Messages on the drive were clipped and polite, administrative in tone, but every polite line moved money in misdirection, with surgical rhythm. Ruiz ordered a perimeter sweep, floodlights staggered, cameras tested, doors taped for prints, and a quiet route to the study for sensitive transfers. Nathan followed, Titan close, the dog moving with that deliberate grace reserved for rooms carrying risk beneath wood polish and family history. They turned toward the east hall, just as Titan growled, low and precise, the sound he used when ambiguity ended. Shards glittered under the door, rain stippling the rug, mud prints angling from the camellias and skidding toward the fountain. The alarm panel for that sector was dead, breaker wire snipped clean as silk. Whoever came knew how to read old bones. Ruiz arrived running, heart slid beside the door. Titan bolted through the opening, launched down the steps and cut left into thickened gray. Nathan vaulted the rail after him. Evelyn followed, calling instructions into her phone, voice flat, efficient, terrified only after the work would finish. The dog cleared the hedge, barreled through wet azaleas, and sprinted toward the lower maintenance road with a cadence Nathan knew from training fields. Breath burned, rain blinded, gravel kicked, roots tried to take ankles, branches slapped faces. Still, the barking never lost direction or purpose. A figure burst from the trees ahead and splashed across the road, stumbled, recovered, and flung a dark object into the drainage ditch. Titan flanked without biting, herding the runner toward a sagging gate. Hart appeared from the opposite shoulder and raised a palm like a wall. The stranger slid under the mesh. Ruiz vaulted, tackled cleanly, rolled and pinned him while deputies closed from the trailhead with cuffs and bags. Nathan pointed at the ditch tuft where the object vanished. A deputy fished out a waterproof pouch holding a phone and a second drive. Evelyn exhaled. A theory now had mud on it. Proof wore rain. Back inside, Lark, the courier from a surveillance still, dripped onto a chair while agents documented glass pry marks, footprints, and the clipped breaker wire. Hart loaded the new drive. Directories unfolded, revealing routes, handoffs, hotel codes, courier rosters, and a travel lattice spanning 6 countries and 15 cities. Entries assigned tasks with genteel brevity, each line ending with 2 letters no one misread anymore. At the bottom of one sheet, a fresh note chilled the room: window east, breaker cut, retrieve box, scare target if blocked, no linger. Nathan felt anger rise hard and honest. Fear tried to chase it. Titan pressed against his leg and chose steadiness for both of them. Ruiz called the county, staged a patrol at the lane, then briefed a team to hit a listed storage unit 2 towns over. Evelyn laid the master ledger beside the lattice. Columns interlocked until conjecture tightened into indictment, her shoulders lowered by a fraction. Titan resumed his figure 8, between Nathan and the door, pausing whenever wind found the frame and lifted it into a tiny shutter. Rain flattened, then thickened, then flattened again, a tide with no moon, just pressure and persist. Lark stared at the dog, then the safe, then the hallway, choosing calculations and losing nerve. Nobody needed to shout. Ruiz tried patience. Hart used exposure math. Evelyn offered the ledger's contempt for foot soldiers. Nathan offered silence that refused to blink. Thirst cracked the courier's posture. Water arrived. He talked in fragments that grew into a map, a rote, an hour, a code, a unit. Agents moved. Radios murmured. Headlights rolled. Titan returned to the doorframe and watched the night where shapes reorganized themselves as Nathan knelt and held the collar. Not restraint, communion. The tag was warm, real, proof that loyalty could be trained without becoming blind. Lightning stitched the river. Thunder answered late. For a breath, the world displayed its mechanism of delay and consequence in clean relief. Evelyn brought copies for the field teams, then placed a hand on Nathan's shoulder in a pressure that said breathe, continue, refuse retreat. He nodded, stood and walked the perimeter with Hart, counting latches, testing locks, tagging soft spots that needed carpenters and camera. When they returned, Ruiz had a call from storage: boxes, burner stacks, prepaid cards, courier logs, rental contracts in a hard case with a stamped card reading J. The room did not cheer. It leaned forward. Titan's ears flicked. Evelyn whispered good and opened the next folder to match dates against routes. The lattice showed a planned departure in 3 days using a coastal airport, a charter vendor and a shell invoice referencing a floral gala. Hart drew a rectangle around the airport note and tapped twice. Ruiz said we must move before sunset, because pressure must arrive earlier than habit. Nathan heard his heartbeat slow into something workable. Grief for what had been promised still lived inside, but purpose took the wheel. He set coffee, ignored hunger and stayed near the dog, whose stillness taught him more than speeches about courage ever had. Fog muscled the windows until the lawn vanished. The world reduced to walls, doors, breath, and the conviction that standing firm mattered. Lark, cooling, conceded another fragment, a name for a courier coordinator in a handoff alley behind a shuttered gallery on River Street. Evelyn penciled times, matched them to camera grids, and called a contact who controlled a tenancy key and quiet access to the alley camera. Nathan thought of drawings layered with tracing paper, each line a decision that narrows options until only structure remains. This day felt like that. A tech decrypted a message archive. The administrative tone never cracked. Still, the sequence betrayed work. JD had added redundancies and doubled counter-surveillance steps. Fear makes planners louder, Evelyn said, and Hart nodded, because bureaucracy always groans when surprised. Titan lifted his head, stared at the hallway, then barked once, the bark that says notice. Moments later, a patrol car announced itself with a curt honk at the gate. A deputy delivered stills from a plate reader upstream, images of the rental sedan looping the county line, counting schedules, probing margins. Ruiz rerouted a team, posted an unmarked unit beyond the bend, and told Nathan not to step outside without a shadow until sunrise tomorrow. Nathan accepted the rule. Experience had taught him that pride is a terrible security policy. Survival prefers quiet cooperation. He checked the broken door. Carpenters would arrive at first light. For now, screws, braces, and tape transformed damage into a temporary boundary. Titan inspected the fix and sat against it like a seal.
eyes on the gray pane where rain crawled in tired rivulets. When the lane fell to darkness again, phones flashed. The storage team had found a calendar with 4 highlighted ceremonies, including Willow. Evelyn stared at the circle around today, and felt heat in her face that had nothing to do with the weather. Hart called it arrogance. Ruiz called it bookkeeping, which guiltless criminals adore, and told the techs to lift every smudge of print they could coax from cardboard. The room settled into a focused hum, the exact opposite of panic, while Titan guarded the seam between house and storm with patient ferocity. Nathan felt the familiar urge to apologize to the past for not seeing sooner, then rejected it. The right apology is an action that prevents repetition. If fear waits at your threshold, he thought, let resolve step out first. That belief is a door nobody else can lock. He spoke to Titan without words by matching the dog's breath, found his center and turned back to the table where routes kept form. Evelyn squeezed his hand once, a rare concession. Duty allows tenderness when it builds endurance rather than replacing it. Outside, rain kept rewriting the garden. Inside, agents kept rewriting the future of a network that had mistaken weddings for camouflage. Through it all, the shepherd neither slept nor relented, a bright constant stitched into the storm, proof that instinct, honored, becomes strategy. Stand with truth. Let instinct anchor courage when fear speaks.
By late morning, Savannah looked newly washed, sunlight lifting from wet brick and iron, while the river calmed to a silver hush. Federal teams had moved before dawn, rolling doors, serving warrants, mirroring drives, boxing ledgers, and mapping shells that smiled on paper and vanished in practice. Files from Willow Hall synchronized with caches and storage, and Valeria's testimony stitched dates, routes, and payments into a pattern even skeptics could not ignore. Coordinators flipped, a charter vendor folded, plate readers pinned couriers who had looped the county line at odd hours, and a ledger labeled with a bland foundation name began to read like a confession that had waited too long for breath. The case took a larger shape under clean light, not solved, never simple, yet aligned enough to move without guessing. Nathan gave his copies, signed receipts, and answered quietly, while Titan rested at his boots, watchful, patient, choosing stillness that said ready rather than afraid. Evelyn outlined how seasons and choir had hidden movement under ceremonies, how JD Foundation routed gifts through daylight into offshore midnight, and how the crooked frames list matched routing strings buried in polite emails. Agents wrote, nodded, asked for clarity, and kept their voices even. Momentum replaced dread. Nobody cheered. People doing careful work rarely do. After the briefing, Nathan requested a short visitation. A deputy led him along a corridor that smelled of paper and rain tracked in on his shoes. In a small room with a glass panel, Valeria sat in a plain sweater and standard slacks, posture exact, eyes unguarded. Public records had caught up with her face. Her name stood without disguise. She thanked him for refusing to let fury reduce her into a cartoon, admitted harm without ornament, and insisted her affection had been real even while her methods had not. Nathan did not romanticize. He told her love had not canceled the ledger, that consequence would not be negotiated by memory, that the ring he had almost set would live as an honest chapter, rather than a myth. She nodded, looked at Titan, and said the shepherd had heard a frequency she had ignored for years. He mentioned Titan, how the dog had marked a line that no human wanted to see. She smiled with something like relief, and said instinct had spoken across a lifetime of rehearsal, and at last she had listened. They did not promise futures, they accepted direction. Deputies shifted. Council signaled time. The visit ended with a nod that was not farewell, only acknowledgement that truth had set them both on roads neither would choose alone. Willow Hall greeted him with open windows and clean weather. New glass filled the frame that rain and hands had broken. Fresh conduit protected lines. Floods staggered themselves off any pattern, and cameras watched like quiet family returned chairs to ordinary places. Staff brewed coffee that steadied bones. Evelyn sorted copies for teams that would fly before sunrise. Titan inspected doorways, tasted corners, and placed himself where the house met the world, as if his body were a hinge the night could not slip past. Nathan stepped outside. The lawn wore beads. Hedges sagged and sighed, and the oaks dripped like ropes, drying after a storm. A patrol rolled by and kept rolling. No idling sedan waited today. Threat remained real, but pressure now moved in both directions. He thought about salvaged timber, how wood that remembers hail can still carry rooflines if joined with care. He promised structure, not naivete, layered locks, random light, strong hinges, honest schedules, and the discipline to hear instinct before charm. He walked to the aisle stones where vows had trembled and crouched beside Titan beneath green filtered light. Fingers pressed into the thick coat at the shoulders, warmth answered, breath steady. You were right, he whispered, and the dog leaned into the touch before resuming that poised stillness. A sentry learns when nothing must pass unseen. Evelyn joined him with updates. Additional warrants approved. A coordinator now cooperating. Rosters matched to courier logs from 3 ports. A charter plan disrupted, and a broader panel scheduled to receive the record next week. JD remained a signature without a face, yet the network had been forced into daylight, where secrets burn. They ate bread and fruit, signed transfer forms, moved the last box into a safe bracketed to studs, and reset sensors to random intervals so patient watchers would learn nothing. The house felt different, not innocent, not haunted, simply aligned with truth. In that alignment, he could breathe. Afternoon widened, rain withdrew, color returned to places he had ignored while living in an emergency. Near dusk, the clouds tore completely, and soft gold poured across brick, iron hedges and the river's calm bend. He stood on the steps with Titan and Evelyn at his side, and let the light find him. He did not feel triumphant. He felt the network would thrash, hearings would grind, long calendars would ask for stamina. Even so, a path had opened that did not require pretending. He lifted a hand as a patrol passed, and the driver saluted back, a small courtesy that landed like a promise to keep watch. Before nightfall, he returned to the courthouse for a brief check-in. Through the glass he saw Valeria confer with counsel, shoulders lowered, breathing even, performance gone. When she noticed him, she lifted 2 fingers from a page in a gesture that meant thank you without asking for absolution. He answered with a nod that meant continue. Titan sat, watched and released a slow exhale that sounded like acceptance. Deputies moved purpose along, schedules clicked. The day made room for tomorrow. He drove home through streets, rinsed to a brighter color. Shop doors stood open, bells lifted small tunes, and balconies let shirts dry in the sun that finally stayed. At the gate he paused, practiced the habit of looking, then rolled forward. Titan entered first, checked the kitchen, checked the hall, returned and nudged his knee as if to say proceed. They walked the rooms together, not hunting, confirming. On the desk lay a receipt acknowledging final custody of files, and a note from Evelyn in tight script. Sleep in shifts. Call at 4. We keep moving. He smiled without humor and slid the paper into a drawer. Outside, the western sky cleared to porcelain, and one bright coin of sun balanced over the river, turning every pane in the house into a small warm lantern. He knelt, stroked Titan's neck, and felt hope arrive not as a trumpet but as temperature, as steadiness, as a window that no longer rattled when night pressed its face against the glass. If you have ever felt a quiet tug beneath celebration, a prickle under polished words, or a stillness that asked you to slow down and listen, honor that message. Share a story of the moment your gut revealed what surfaces hid, a contract you reread, a meeting you moved, a stranger you declined to follow, a promise you tested before trusting. Write it, post it, hand it to a friend. Someone standing at a window, a gate, a keyboard, or an altar might carry courage because you spoke. Trust the Titan within you, the part that knows when to stand firm, the sense that guards before harm takes shape. Let that small signal become practice, a daily discipline stronger than charm, noise, hurry, or doubt forever. And if this chapter taught anything, let it be that truth makes room for breath, and instinct, honored, can lead you out of fog into light.